Hello, and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Each week we focus on the big stories in the news, and hopefully that'll provoke some discussion with you. So please get involved in the show and comment wherever you wish underneath the program you're watching at this time. And don't forget, of course, if you like the show, you can subscribe and get notifications of when we go live each and every week. And our email address, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. So, as always, joining us for our property discussion is our property expert, Joe Joshi. Morning, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning to everybody this morning. Nice to see that we haven't got the hurricane, but the sun is shining out there a little bit. My wife says it's a good day for washing. Apparently, that's the deal, because all the sheets can be dry. So I think she was trying to tell me this morning before I came on that that's a job for me to help her with later on. Changes have happened, of course, though our logo hasn't changed on there, but we are now Auction Property, our sponsors, and of course Fairview International going forward, and we'll cover more of that as time goes on. But I have to have a quick respectful mention for a friend that has just passed away, Malcolm Bird, who is a Facebook friend as well as a personal friend. He's a plumber and has been doing the job for too many years that I can think about, and my heart goes out to their family and his friends. This morning he's passed away from COVID. He was under in a hospital in a coma. And that news has just come through, which is quite sad for this time of the morning. But anyway, my respects, and may he rest in peace.
Indeed, and of course poignant for you because you're just recovering from it yourself.
Yeah, it's quite devastating to think that I'm still here to tell a story. I didn't really realise, to be perfectly honest with you. I suppose sometimes you laugh in the face of these things. That how serious and how severe this whole pandemic is, and this virus is, and people should really, take heed. I was at home for 25 days, and we were always concerned that we hadn't heard from Malcolm. Malcolm was just one of these guys that did and turned up in his own way, had his own personality. But literally seconds ago, just before we came on air, I got a message to say that sadly he passed away last night, and it sort of brings everything into perspective, Paul, to be honest with you, to be grateful and how lucky we are. So I'm sorry to start the program with a little bit of sad news, but at the same time, I think it's important to be real and appreciate every moment that we all enjoy. Please go out and get your boosters, vaccinate, protect yourself. Even if others don't do it, make sure you do it. As long as you look after yourself, and the rest will come together.
Yeah, Bob agrees. Sad news indeed, and our condolences to Malcolm's family, of course. Joe, interesting times at the moment for Boris, certainly. And obviously we're going to discuss some of those matters in just a moment. And whilst we're not a political show, the property industry is very much in focus around what the Tory party and what the government indeed are doing about generation buy and rent and all that kind of thing. So we'll come on to that in a minute. But obviously it's important to note this week that Plan B was put into existence. And of course that has an effect on the property industry, those of course operating branches up and down the country, masks, and obviously the directive where possible to work from home. So that's going to have an impact on how certainly the high street branches are operating, isn't it?
Yes and no, Paul. To be honest with you, I think change happened 2 years ago with this, in all honesty, when we sort of hit the crisis with this pandemic, with this virus, and we were all taken out of our comfort zone, It was unknown, not known in any way of what was right, what was wrong. Everybody was trying to sort of stab in the dark and hope that they were finding the right thing. And the pandemic made massive changes in our industry, for the estate agency, the property industry, and to be perfectly honest with you, every man and their uncle in the office industry generally, because all of a sudden we were having to work from home, and you couldn't travel. There's all sorts of restrictions, and so the platform has already been set. So Plan B has come into it, and I think for the last 2 years, a lot of people have kind of already been used to that. High Street agency has probably, in my book, had its day. It's had its days way before. The pandemic fast-tracked that, in all honesty. When you remember the old phase of the was it the radio killed the video star, or the video killed the radio star?
Video killed the radio star. Yes.
Yeah, and I just think that the internet killed the newspaper was probably the way I was trying to get that too, and that was because I remember the days when we used to sort of, and I'm sure those people that are listening in and watching will remember that they were waiting for the property news or the Informer or whatever their local paper was to land at the door or at the local agent, and they'd pop down there of the night or the morning, early morning before, pick it up and plow through 30, 40, 50, 100 pages of property and look for the one that they wanted to do. Of course, the internet came along, and the larger portals came along and absolutely killed that. So yes, there is a little bit of that. So that internet existence started to see the end of what was the high street. There was no reason for people to be sitting in a shop front window. People actually stopped calling in, didn't want to go into the offices. And our industry is such that mostly we meet clients if we're doing a viewing at the property that they're going to view. And then now most of the stuff is done through emails and other means, and
DocuSign and things like that.
Yeah. So the high street kind of has had its day, and it probably had its day before. But what the pandemic did is fast track that into a situation where it's not necessary anymore. And yes, I know we still have that sort of mindset that we need to have a window to show that. But our window is, of course, the internet, and I'm sure you will see that most people are now looking at that in a very, very different way. So I don't think that it's actually going to make a huge impact, a difference. It's probably more of a subject to talk about because it's just something to talk about, really. But I personally think that most people have already accepted and understand and appreciate that this is the way forward for the property and the agency world.
I think it's worth also mentioning, Joe, to be honest with you, that the property industry has managed to navigate its way through one of its most successful 18-month periods, boom period you could call it, whilst being under lockdown. So clearly the number of homes sold, 1 in 19 homes sold in the last 12 months, that's happened with a large part of that year being in lockdown. So one suggests that probably it's going to be fine. Also this morning, nice to see Roy with us. Morning, Joe. Good to see you up and about and feeling a bit better. So Roy's noticed you're sounding better, which is great news. So thank you, and morning, Roy, for joining us today. Let's get into our first proper discussion of the morning. Just thought it was worth being timely there with the Plan B being mentioned. But this is going to be, Boris has had, what a week. And yet more bad news, because unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, despite his desire to turn Generation Rent into Generation Buy, it's had absolutely zero effect. So yet again, it's another policy that's all mouth and trousers. And the reason that we know this is because of a new survey that's come out. This is a survey that has looked at the number of owner-occupiers in England, and it's broadly unchanged since 2019. So 65% of the estimated 24 million households in England were owner-occupiers in 2021, which is the same as it was in 2019, but a rise of 2% from where it was in 2015. So things are shifting, but really, really slowly. This is the English Housing Survey of 2020 to 21. The data shows in that period that 35% of households were outright owners, which I guess is the over 55s and the retired and that kind of thing, while 30% were buying with a mortgage, which surprised me somewhat. I guess that's an interesting dynamic. I thought maybe there would be more buying with a mortgage than there would be owning outright. It says a lot for perhaps the state of our home ownership in this country. Private rented sector accounted for 19%, 4.4 million of households in England, unchanged from 2019. So generation rent is still just the same size as it was 2.5 years ago, but slightly lower than the recorded 2015 figure. So actually, if you want to go back as far as 2015, generation rent has actually gone down. So unsurprisingly, renting was more common in London, 27% of households living in the private rented sector in that period, up from 17% and 17% for the rest of England. So basically, it's business as usual. Nothing's changed, Joe, despite all of the incentives to get on the property ladder and to come out of rent in 2020, 1 in 19 homes being sold and stamp duty holidays. Nothing's really changed.
Yeah, I think I know you love your stats. So from a stats point of view, it makes great reading. But from my basic reality point of view, my view is as follows, and that is that 2.5 years ago, we were probably rolling into the pandemic. Over the last 2 years, a lot of people that are rented, a good percentage of those people have unfortunately fallen into arrears and subsequently can't actually afford to shift out. They can't afford to move out until they can either clear out their arrears or find someone else, a new person that will do it. And those arrear situation causes a problem for them to even purchase properties because the credit files will have recorded that. And so that makes it very difficult for them to buy. However, the larger number of people that did sell and move out because they wanted to have the race for space and a bit more air was that people moved from places like London outwards, and they sold at the best prices and ended up buying. And as you rightly say, there were lesser people with mortgages than you thought, but majority of them probably not downsized in property, maybe upsized in property, but downsized in their debts. In other words, they cleared off their mortgages and ended up buying properties for cash. Because I think you remember in your stats that some time back there was a situation where the number of people was quite shocking, how many people had bought properties cash. So I think the generation to buy is still on the table. Unfortunately, Boris is getting a bit of a kick in, not mostly due to his partying atmosphere. And of course, at this moment in time, he's going to get everything else thrown at him. But I think our game in the world of property, which is what we're experts and talk about is that people will continue. And the last 2 years, as you said earlier on, has been unscathed for the property industry, despite all of the above, and that is that people have still found money. So investors have found money, first-time buyers have found money, but families have found money. So the stamp duty has helped. House prices have continued to stay up, and so yes, the statistics may paint a gloomy picture, but the overall picture in the last 2 years has been pretty sound for the property industry. The generation to buy as opposed to the generation to rent is primarily because where we are. I mean, it's caused problems, and I speak to people when they've had credits, for example, given to them by the benefits. Some of those have been taken away because they came to an end. it might be only 20, £30, but 20, £30 to some people is a lot of money. And that can cause, I mean, it can cause between food on the table in that week for their children and themselves or not. And so those people are there and will continue to be in the rental. So I think the rental market will always continue. It's part of the reason why the investors are continuing to buy, because they can see that. And the government uses and will continue, and successive governments throughout my time, the last 40 odd years, has always used the property market as a yardstick and as a shaping stick to what they want to do and when they want to do it and how they want to do it, because they know that the British public in general they have a desire and a wish to have home ownership, albeit as a mortgage to buy or perhaps even to rent. They want their own place, whatever happens, and I think that will continue to be the case over the coming years. And they will say, I mean, you will also note, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners will note that already media has started to murmur that house prices are going to drop in 2022. It'll be a subject that we'll cover probably another time. But if I haven't heard that scenario for the last 40 years, 100, a million times, I haven't heard it 200 million times. It's always been something that they'll do, because obviously it sells papers, it sells media. Oh my God, and people love to have that as we can't make an offer on that. We don't want to buy that because you've heard that housing prices are going to fall. Well, I tell them I've been hearing that for 40 years and people have still been buying. So I'm not sure where you're going to go with that. But that's the way the media works.
Well, the rented sector is 4 million households, which is 17%. The smallest is 10% renting from housing associations, and local authorities is 1.6 million at 7%. But what was interesting was that 13% of the rental stock failed to meet decent home standards. This was lower than the proportion of private rented, 21%, and owner-occupied, 16%. So, in other words, basically 13% of the rented stock is not fit for purpose and fails to meet basic standards, which is quite alarming, really. And furthermore, the government's green agenda also gets a bit of a slating, because the rate or the rating of all the properties in the UK went up from 65 points to 66, and that's since 2019. So basically, no one's turning their properties green in any numbers, and the rental properties still prove to be pretty squalid in certain sectors and situations. So it's not a great picture for the government here, and one wonders when they're actually going to, or if they're ever going to really step in with anything meaningful, because this notion of building 300,000 homes and wanting to turn people into buyers rather than renters, it looks from these figures like it's hyperbole, really.
The problem is, Paul, and I truly understand the figures that you're throwing out, but let's just look at it in a basic term here. Yeah, you take a property to rent. It's your home for whatever that time is going to be it 6 months, 12 months, or the next 5 or 10 years. Because it's your rental property, you choose not to do anything to maintain it and keep it comfortable. That onus is always fallen back on the landlord. Now, obviously, landlords don't get in or can't get in or don't want to disturb the people or don't have the money. And equally, councils where they are renting properties out don't get in, don't want to do the work or don't have the funds. And it's the old adage, the one that shouts the loudest probably is going to get heard, and the other ones are probably not going to get heard. And so those are the things that make it difficult for the quality of property. But I'm a firm believer personally that if it's your home and you want to make it comfortable, there are things that you would do. I mean, if you own your own car, you're going to go and do those. It's the same story with the rental of a car. You rent a car, you don't care whether you left all the chocolate wrappers in the back or not, because as far as you're concerned, it's rented. I think there should be, and people should take on board that part of this responsibility is their own health and their own environment, and they need to be able to say, well, actually, while I'm here, I live in this place, this is my home, I need to at least help maintain it and look after it. The onus is always put on. You can always tell the difference. I've known this for forever and a day. The minute you've paid for something yourself and you know it's yours, you become amazingly overprotective, even to the point where you turn around and say to someone before you walk in, would you mind taking your shoes off because I've just had a new carpet put down. But if you're in a rented accommodation, you don't really care whether the carpet's been put down or not. You just say, yeah, it's all right, it's not mine, I don't really care. So I think that mindset of I don't care where I live and what I look also is a mindset in the landlords, and they think, well, the tenant doesn't really care, so why should I care? You need to have that relationship where it's got to be kept well and looked after, and if you look after it well, then the landlord will look after it well. But if the tenant doesn't take the responsibility and look after it, then the chances are the landlord takes the same view and says, okay, well, actually, to be honest with you, I'd rather have you out, redecorate it, look for a new tenant who might actually look after my property better. So there's that whole mindset about, who really wants to make this happen? How do you want to make this comfortable? And governments, obviously, councils will turn around and say they don't have the money, they don't have the access, they don't have the flexibility. And of course, I can tell you, over the last 2 years, certainly, getting into a house to do anything, let alone a viewing, has been a tall order. If there's anything that anyone can tell you that you can't do, they'll say, well, actually, if you can't wear a mask, actually, I don't want you to go into my house. I don't know where it is. It's not even sanitized. I mean, even if it's the shittiest looking place under the sun, they still don't let you in because actually you are probably far more cleaner than the property that you're going to go into. But the fact is that the example is that they had this perfect sound excuse to say that they can't do that. And then we have stats to say, oh, well, the people don't maintain it. Well, actually, you know what? It's a chicken and egg situation. You can't get you to do something. You can't understand it. So I accept your figures. I accept the stats. But the reality is that the responsibility falls on the individual. Either you want to be part of it and you deal with it, or you don't want to be part of it. And I think that's where they do. And it's the same problem with the rental situations, isn't it? If you're not maintaining it, you're not actually bothered to keep it updated, then you're suffering down the line. Because if you're suffering down the line about your credit facilities and so forth, they're not going to be able to move. So it just goes round and round and round, which is great for us because it gives me a lot to talk about. But the reality is that there is some real sort of ground floor, firm feet on the ground stories as opposed to what the stats are.
There is a dilemma here because you can't have it both ways if you're the government. You want to turn generation rent into generation buy, okay? Healthy private rented sector. If you're given the fact that you've got a limited amount of supply and supply is short because there's just not enough properties, and also because we're not building enough new properties, I think we're back online, so hopefully people can join us. We are back online. In fact, I don't know what happened. It's the first time in over a year that we've actually had our stream interrupted. I've no idea what happened. It's telling me we have viewers here. So
that's because of the generation renters.
Yes, but my point was this, Joe: with a limited supply of property, okay, with a limited supply of property, you can't have it both ways because if you're not building enough new properties and you're getting people to buy property, you're going to have less left in the rental sector, and it's borne out in the figures. Rental sector has dropped by 2%, which is a massive 258,000 homes in the year. Guy is on the line. He says we're back on air, so that's great news. Thank you, Guy, for confirming that for us. So the point being that we've lost 258,000 homes from rental, and that's borne. I think we're back, so please do not swear, Joe. You're live on Channel 4. I've no idea. We have a stream issue this morning, so apologies to everybody watching. I just don't think I'm meant to make that point, but I think you got my answer. Do you want to answer the government can't have it both ways? Because at the end of the day, if they do get people to buy, then there's going to be less property available to rent unless you start building properties, which they're clearly not.
Okay, so this is a perfect scenario for every government, Paul. It's been the same forever and a day. I've said this time and time again. It suits them not to build more houses, though they always make the pledge that they are going to build more houses. And I'm probably, I don't know if you're sort of, I can't hear anybody now, so I think we're off. Can you hear
No,
me?
we're okay.
Oh, okay.
We're live.
Yeah, so I think we're still live. Okay, that's good to know. So I think that it suits them not to build many, though everyone turns around and says they're going to, build more and more houses. Equally, you have to understand that we have a lot of new guests arriving at our shores every so often, which have got to be housed. So of course, the supply of whatever they've got is somewhat restricted. And because we have more and more people that don't come through the system directly through the airports and Eurotunnel, they come directly from dinghies, etc. They've got to be housed, and so subsequently, there's a lot of a lot of demand on the government to do that. Now, whilst I know you're having a good go at the government, and I'm trying to be protective in the sense that it's not their fault, though they are the ones that are actually going to be the ones going to be hung. It is a systematical fault. Certain circumstances are such that there are more people coming in and we don't have as much housing to rent. The stock that they have got, some of it is maybe substandard, some of it they can't get people out of because of the time that we're in. And so the housing market continues to be positive, and that's what you've got to see. That's my message out of Property Matters, and that is that in the it is the safest thing to buy. It is always going to be an investment. There's always going to be someone who wants to rent something that you're going to own if you're an investor, and the people are still going to continue to want to buy when they can afford, and obviously with mortgages set to potentially rise next year, or the mortgage rate, Bank of England rate set to rise next year. The Bank of England are equally conscious that they know that will make a little stop. So they are now talking about easing their statistics, their stats, or their criteria, should I say, in order to make sure that people can still try to get on the property ladder. So in one way, it's getting a hurt, i.e. the fact that the generation to rent is not changing and the generation to buy isn't happening. On the other hand, the last couple of years, the housing market is what's kept the economy going forward. They know that. They also know that the Bank of England have got to continue to put the rate up. But at the same time, the Bank of England are now saying that they're going to ease the criteria. In other words, at the moment, if somebody goes in and says to them, I want a mortgage, and I'm sure Bob will come in because this is Bob's territory, not mine, but I'm just generalizing. My caveat is I'm not a mortgage advisor, not advised by the FCA and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just generalizing that, they multiply this by the fact that they consider it as a 3% default. So let's say if it's at 1.25%, they will do their sums on the fact that if it was 3%, could this person still afford to buy it? What they're now thinking of saying is that, we'll take that away and actually just do it on the current, which means that people will be able to still borrow more. And because they were able to borrow more, they're going to be more enticed to. So the question at the moment is house prices may fall in 2022. And then there's another argument that obviously if the Bank of England eases its criteria, will house prices continue to rise, or will there be another bubble? So, government can do whatever they like. The people are the ones that make the choices, and they want to continue to buy and invest because it is what gives them the best return, and it is what people would like to do.
Bob says the assumed rate that mortgage companies ask for is, could you afford rates to be at 7%? And actually the pay rates are around about 2-ish currently. So, yeah, that's absolutely right, what Bob says, as you'd expect. And that's that. But I did read actually in this week's news that there's a suggestion that the Bank of England is going to ease that requirement. I'm sure Bob will know that for sure. But I did read that the Bank of England are considering a softening of those rules of affordability to get more people in. There was also a point made earlier by Guy, which we've lost because we've had to go onto a new stream. But Guy made a point earlier on, which is really good, is actually, you'll never get rid of renting, because actually there's a whole generation, two generations of people, in fact, that actually prefer to rent. So young people, because they've got, flexibility, or they want flexibility for their careers. And I'm thinking of my own eldest son at the moment. He doesn't want to buy because he might well be moving to California to work. So what's that got to do with what's that got to do with wanting to buy a property? So the flexibility suits his generation, I suspect. And then, of course, there are older people who are moving into probably released equity from their property, and they're moved into rented retirement homes or retirement villages, that kind of thing. So I guess we're always going to have a need for renting, because there's always going to be a flexible and mobile market to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't think, this is not a government drive. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's not a government drive. It is a personal drive, a personal purpose. And so, like you just said, I can see you probably surfing on the Californian waves very soon, and they'll think that you're the next Baywatch guru or something. And but the younger generation are that way. They are inclined to think, what, I don't want to stay in one place. They're not. Maybe after a certain time, when they settle, maybe get hitched up, or have a child, or do something, they might have a different view. But right now, it's their oyster. The world is their oyster. They want to go and do so. That generation to rent, absolutely, Guy. I agree with you. There is always going to be people, and more people, especially younger ones, who can't get on the mortgage ladder, haven't settled down in their life, want to go out there and surf like Paul would do, they're just going to go out and rent. And then there's the oldie goldies that will obviously want to settle and buy, but may not be able to afford. So we'll have to sort of move out of our southern big ranches and up to like Guy has done. I mean, Guy is sitting lovely and comfortable in, I think it's North Carolina, isn't it, Guy?
Bob's written here, Guy Hasselhoff. Gertch makes an interesting point, though, Joe. Whilst I'm waiting for you to come back, well, hopefully you haven't had to wait too long. 2 points that I'd like to make. That'll be later. There isn't any meaningful eco grants or incentives since the solar panel grants on feed-in tariffs 20 years ago, and there's no benefit for developers on building much-needed family homes as opposed to flats, because they will always be incentivized by GDV and profit rather than housing need in the area, which is a good point. This is the trouble. It was all very well for Thatcher to sell off all the council houses, but the council house stock was rented on a different criteria than the commercial. You can't rely on the private sector to house your citizens wholly.
No, because the criteria that is attached to the council that want to pay the benefits or pay their rent or assist the those are the bits that make private landlords weary. There was a time it was a very nice clean cut situation, and that market was fantastic, and on the basis that people an investor would buy and quite happily rent to the council, because the council will pay the rent directly to the landlord, and they actually got the money. Then they came up with this bizarre scheme where they said, actually, we have to pay the money to the tenant. Now, with respect, the tenant, when they get the money, will probably, having it, doing whatever they were doing, whether they're shopping or surfing and on Baywatch or wherever they decided to go, they used the money and they never paid the landlord. And that still is the current situation at this moment in time. And because of that, landlords choose, where possible, not to rent to a council tenant, because they just expect hassle. They know the payments aren't going to happen. Now, if anything, if the government wants to do anything, and Boris is watching, because I know he watches on a Sunday morning, Boris, you have to get that reversed, like you do with most other things. You put a reverse gear every so often, right? When you make a boo boo, like you did with your party a couple of this time last year, and now you're going to have to reverse it this year because you can't have a party, allegedly. And so you better put a reverse gear and tell your strong council holds to start paying the landlords. And I know loads of landlords will be happy with me saying that, and they will invest and buy, and you can rent more properties out. It's not really not a difficult thing to do. It's not as hard as having a quiet party and then phoning up and saying, well, we actually didn't do it. So there you are.
Bob says a change in the law facing developers to build social housing quota would help in a separate location in the same town. So so there could be some legislation to help building quotas, but that's the case anyway, isn't it? That maybe something a bit more forceful is what Bob's point is. But surely you have to build affordable homes within the bigger 4 and 5 bedroom homes. Certainly the developments I see being built, they've all got an element of it usually, haven't they? In some way,
they have, but there's a huge amount where. Look, it doesn't pay a developer. There's no interest in a developer having a social housing aspect on it because, buyers don't want to live, closer to social housing because they find that some of those tenants may not be tenants that they want to live near. The developer doesn't want to build it because his GDV goes down because he's got to almost gift the housing association with the social housing. So what Bob's saying is right. What they should have, you don't want to create a ghetto, but back in the 70s, 80s when I was in the chair, we found that governments, local councils used to have areas. We talked about this very briefly. 5 new towns were built. They were built primarily to be able to move people from out of London to a new life. They took those initiatives, and they've got to take those initiatives in some of their areas and say, so you don't want to create a uncomfortable ghetto in order to do that. And that's where housing association or social housing as part of new development became, because they were trying to integrate ordinary life and ordinary people into perhaps people that were not socially part of that society. But they don't make it interesting. So what happens is developers tend to want to negotiate with the local council. The local council are desperate for money, or more often than none. So they take the money and not take the housing part of it. And that's why they end up with shortage in social housing, because they don't forget about the social people who can't rent, Paul. The local council need the money because they've spent it. It's a bit like, people like Croydon and Slough. Where's all their money gone? They're bankrupt, and because they've made bad decisions.
Well, the government's got a renters reform white paper due shortly. It's in development at the moment, and this would be an opportunity really to address some of the issues that we're talking about. So it'll be interesting to see what's in there. But one of the things that this report suggests is that the government should consider in that reform white paper suggesting ways to support landlords with grants or whatever to obviously help to improve the stock, but also to help them meet the target of net zero emissions by 2050 on all rental properties. Because, as you said earlier, you can see the landlords, a lot of them are not even keeping the properties up to scratch for the people that are living in them now, according to the basic terms of decency that have been outlined. So therefore, they're certainly not going to invest in getting them net zero by 2050. So do we think, and I put this out to the wider audience watching as well, do you think the government has a responsibility to help these landlords, or is it all got to be left to private enterprise?
I think, first of all, the government has set itself unrealistic tasks and targets. Going green and changing all these things are not going to happen. I think it's lip service, largely to accommodate all the people in the world to make sure that we can do it. I personally can't even see how they're going to tell all these people to change their cars and become electric. If you think about just general life itself, let's just give you the home example of this. In the north of United Kingdom, Glasgow and Scotland, they have been out of power for how many weeks now, gentlemen?
10 days, something like
Right.
that. I think certainly it was
Yeah.
last time I saw. I don't know if they've got it now.
Considering we're thinking about going all electric, we can't even deal with what we got at the moment, let alone what potentially they could do. So I think it's just hot air, in my opinion. They should be sensible by saying that, that our target is a longer date, and yes, we'd like to do X, Y, Z, and we're not forcing people to. People aren't going to do it. The poor guy down the road who can't afford to turn around and buy a new electric car isn't going to go. What do you think he's going to do? Get a bicycle and start pedaling? I don't think so. He's going to carry on driving his car. And it's the same with homes. People can't all afford to do those changes, but it will take time. So yes, there should be some government grants, or there should be some guidance and contracted by the government. But the problem is the government can't even do its own stock. So how are they going to help the private sector? So I think this is, in my opinion, it's a lot of lip service for the fact that it is. I just don't think it's a realistic target at the moment, and I think they should incentivize landlords, and they could do that through tax breaks, which they keep putting up, in order for them to bring that into some sort of shape. I don't think the government can put anybody to sort the problems out. I don't think they can afford the money, but they might be able to afford tax breaks, and that might give the incentive to landlords to say, well, actually, you know what, when the next time my tenant moves out, I will make the effort to make it as much green as possible, as much to improve my EPC, to get all the things and be seen to be partaking in a challenge that the government set out. But I'm sure the wider audience will have their own views on this.
Let's widen the discussion slightly. A final point for today, because I can't believe we've got to 20 to 11 already, and it's it was only the first discussion. But this is broadening the point out. So I suppose voters or the general public, only 1 in 5, 18%, believe the government is truly invested in the housing shortage. The government set a target of delivering 300,000 new homes. As we know, they've never achieved it. In every parliament, they've done this. But just 16% of people will think that they'll actually ever achieve the target. UK governments are frequently accused of short-termism in their aims, while the mortgage industry has long since complained that the role of housing minister, and this is a really interesting point, and I didn't realise this. So basically, Michael Gove in his post at the moment, did you realise that the housing minister, Joe, isn't a cabinet position? I thought it was, but it's not in the cabinet. And that kind of, when you've set these big targets and set these big ambitions out, generation rent and so on, how on earth is the housing minister not in the cabinet?
Well, I mean, it's just a little job that Boris has given him to make sure he gets a little bit of a highlight, but he doesn't want him in the cabinet, does he?
But it shows that they're not serious about housing if he's not, doesn't it?
But I've said that in my views time and time again. I just said that for generations, it suits them, Paul. It suits them not to be, but they've got to do lip service. They've got to show people, and successive governments have never achieved that target, and they're never going to achieve that target at all. If they, first of all, if they can't do the right thing, and secondly, of course, if someone isn't a cabinet minister, what they're saying is that they don't actually take that role serious for that person to do something with the housing market, because a broken housing market actually pays the bills better, right? If they fixed it and turn around and say, let's do our 300 homes, we're here, we've got the targets done. And if they turn around and say everything is ordered, there's nothing, I'm out of a job, so are you. And worst of all, they're not going to get the income that they want, because it's all a roll-on point for other parts of the business. It's not just about the rental, the ownership and the sales. There is a huge industry, huge economy that is attached to the housing. Housing is a bit like women, right? If you actually look on the high street, I'm on it. If you look on the high street, if it hadn't been for a woman, half of the shops that exist out there, and half of the products that exist out just wouldn't happen. And that's what I'm saying. It's the same with the housing. If you look at the housing, all of the relative stuff that goes with it, DIY, blah blah blah, it goes on. It's all connected, and so to fix it would be wrong. And so I think that there are certain sectors that they, will play with, and obviously they're given this to go to play with, or should
And
I
of course,
say leveling.
And of course, they're also accused of, because they've sold off public stock via the right to buy scheme, so they've been accused of squeezing supply. And that suggests that they actually want housing off of state control, if you want, and put into the private sector. So that suggests that they're kind of like pushing the housing problem off. And if you haven't got the housing minister in your cabinet, that probably would support that view. But there's a suggestion here that actually this should be more done by the industry, not just Westminster. But the government should push the industry in certain directions. So, for example, looking at unused commercial property and incentivising to turn it into residential dwellings, for example, to extend existing homes and housing projects, to renovate derelict buildings, making it financially worthwhile to do that kind of thing. Of which, of course, as you've mentioned many times on this show, there are thousands of those sort of buildings that could do with a liquor paint, etc., to bring them up to being used as housing again. And we need that creativity of solutions in both the public and the private sector. And the stakes are high because 52% of people, over half of the country, believe it's a really pressing issue in the country right now. But only 14% think it will ever be solved by 2030, and just 15% even in their lifetime. So the negativity on the housing crisis out there is unbelievable. But over half of the country thinks it's a pressing issue, which of course it is.
Absolutely, and the reason why it's a pressing issue for over half of the country is because it's what we live and die by. Our home is everything. What do they say? The Englishman's home is his castle, sort of thing. Probably the same with the Indian man, but now, and the reality is that we want our home. We want to work on that basis. But yes, they're not going to be able to achieve those targets. I can't see it. They will now. I mean, they've got a huge catch up. For about 20, 30 years, what their target is. The last 2-3 years would have probably put a nail in the coffin for a long time, a lot longer, because they got a huge catch up to do with all the money that they've been spending on other things, trying to keep things ticking along. I mean, under the current circumstances, Pfizer and those people are probably the richest people going. I mean, they'll be in the top 100 of the rich list because of the amount of money that they've actually made from that. So there is winners and losers in this right the way through in terms of who's going to get the right support. But in my mind, I think that they are the housing crisis is. I agree with the 50%, but I also agree with the 14 and the lower. They're never going to change it. It's not going to actually happen. But half of it's up to you. And I will say to everybody that it's your home, it's your place, and part of it is your contribution that you've got to make some of those things right for you, if that's what you want going forward. If you want to sit on your hands and wait for someone else to do it for you, then yes, I think the stats are right.
Well, that's all we've got time for, but I just wanted to talk quickly with you about Christmas and New Year, because we are due to do shows on Boxing Day and January the 2nd. And I'm delighted to reveal that through intense negotiations through the week, we are going to have the most fabulous Fab Four since the Beatles. On Boxing Day and New Year's, the 2nd of January rather, in that Bob and Guy will be joining us for our live discussion. So the four of us will be on screen for both of those shows. So we have one next Sunday, and then we have a special on the Boxing Day and on the 2nd. So wanted to draw your attention to that. So when you see that come up in your feed, please do watch us, because we'll have all four of us having a real look back over the year and a light-hearted conversation about all of that. And then we'll look forward in our second show on January the 2nd. So really looking forward to that, aren't we, Joe?
Oh, that's really exciting. And thank you to both Bob and to Guy for regular contributions, sitting in the wings there. And and the time that they've spent with us before. And I think it'll be a great way to see the year out together and build something going forward. It's got its own legs, Property Matters. It was started as a sort of a let me see how it goes there, but I think every Sunday's commitment tells you it's going there, and obviously the contribution from everybody tells you that it's what they like. So the more people that can share our program, the more people that can tell everybody what they like. We just like to talk about good, ordinary stuff. There's nothing scientific about this. Paul's the scientific one in this, actually. I'm not. And because he throws stats and graphs and things because he likes to look clever, but but yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you. Before the end of the year, I'll say thank you from us, but I'm sure all four of us will say thank you to everybody over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we'll leave the last word to Guy, who's in Chapel Hill in North Carolina, and just on the end, a little big sun emoji. So he's the man in the sunshine as we speak. And on that positive note, we'll end Property Matters for this week. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Sorry about the technical glitch in the middle. Hope it didn't spoil the program too much for you. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.